I win this match and I'll adopt you. The billionaire boomed, his laughter echoing like thunder through the grand hall. But Grace, a wisp of a girl, merely shifted a pawn on the checkered board, her brow furrowed in concentration that belied her 5 years. Before we delve further into this unlikely contest, a request. Please share the city from which you're watching this drama unfold. The International Chess Masters Tournament was in full swing at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Its marble floors, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the dazzling light of crystal chandeliers. New York's high society had descended, a glittering assemblage of wealth and influence. Diamond-studded watches flashed as billionaires exchanged pleasantries with chess grandmasters, their voices a low, self-assured hum, a testament to their power and privilege. At the heart of this opulent gathering sat Khalid Al-Mansour, the evening's undisputed star. The Arab billionaire commanded attention effortlessly. His bespoke Armani suit accentuated his imposing frame. A curated collection of rare Patek Philippe watches, each worth more than a small house, lay displayed on velvet cushions as if they were relics in a museum. But it was his legendary arrogance, the driving force behind his $40 billion tech empire, that truly set him apart. Cameras clicked and whirred as Khalid contemplated his next move against Grandmaster Victor Petro, Russia's celebrated chess prodigy. Khalid's really taking his time, whispered a Hollywood actress, surreptitiously recording the match on her phone. Probably calculating another business acquisition, chuckled a Wall Street mogul, his eyes gleaming with avarice. The murmur of the crowd filled the air, a constant, almost palpable presence in the lavish space. A single bottle of vintage champagne cost more than many people earned in a month. Outside, the November rain beat relentlessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a stark dichotomy between the warmth and extravagance within and the unforgiving cold of the outside world. That's when she appeared. A small, almost ethereal figure slipped through the hotel's revolving doors, unnoticed by the glittering throng. A 5-year-old girl, her tangled brown hair plastered to her forehead, wore a faded pink dress that swallowed her small frame. Her sneakers, riddled with holes, squelched with each hesitant step. A tattered backpack hung precariously from her thin shoulders. She stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the grandeur surrounding her. She hadn't come for the tournament. She sought refuge from the biting storm, perhaps hoping to pilfer a forgotten sandwich from the overflowing buffet table. But as her wide, innocent eyes scanned the room, they locked onto something far more significant. The chessboard where Khalid Al-Mansour sat, utterly oblivious that his carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably altered by the most unlikely opponent imaginable. The girl's name was Grace, and she was about to teach a billionaire the true meaning of checkmate. Grace had learned to navigate the shadows. 3 harrowing years in the foster care system and 2 desperate years on the unforgiving streets had ingrained in her the vital lesson that invisibility was survival. She pressed her small body against the cool marble pillars, her eyes, old beyond her years, watching the glittering crowd with the wariness of a hunted animal. The hotel's warmth was intoxicating after hours spent shivering in the frigid rain, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Her stomach gnawed with a familiar hunger. The last semblance of a meal, a half-eaten sandwich scavenged from a park bench, felt like a distant memory. The buffet table gleamed tantalizingly across the room, a mirage laden with delicacies she'd only glimpsed through the steamed-up windows of expensive restaurants. But between her and that potential salvation lay a formidable sea of designer gowns and $1,000 suits. Grace had been fending for herself since escaping her latest foster placement 3 weeks prior. The Hendersons had initially appeared kind, but their kindness had come with strings attached, conditions that made her skin crawl and her heart pound with terror. Running away had been her only option, even if it meant enduring sleepless nights in subway tunnels and scavenging for scraps. She edged closer to the chess tournament, drawn by the hushed intensity emanating from the main table. Chess wasn't entirely foreign to her. Her grandfather had patiently taught her the game before he passed away, back in the hazy days when she still possessed a real home, a real family. Those memories now felt like fragments of someone else's life, a bittersweet dream. But the 64 squares on the board still resonated within her, speaking a language that transcended words. Khalid Al-Mansour dominated the space around the table like a king holding court in his opulent palace. Grace had encountered men like him before, the kind who believed that money could purchase anything, including human beings. His booming laugh resonated with self-assuredness, his gestures were sweeping and theatrical, designed to command attention. Everything about him screamed entitlement. The position is quite complex, commented Grandmaster Elena Volov, her keen eyes studying the board from the sidelines. Petro has a slight advantage in material, but Al-Mansour's knight placement is intriguing. Grace edged closer, her trained eye instantly grasping the intricacies of the complex position. White's king appeared relatively safe, shielded by its pawn structure. But there was something, a subtle weakness, a hidden vulnerability that seemed invisible to everyone else observing the game. The crowd saw power and strategic maneuvering. Grace saw an intricate puzzle, a carefully constructed facade with a hidden, devastating solution. Khalid leaned back in his chair, casually spinning his platinum Rolex, one of a dozen he'd worn throughout the evening, changing them as if they were mere accessories. Time pressure makes champions, he declared to his captivated audience. In business and in chess, hesitation is death. The irony wasn't lost on Grace. This man, who spoke so glibly of hesitation, had never hesitated to eat, to sleep in a warm bed, or to experience the fundamental human right of feeling safe. He wore confidence like impenetrable armor, utterly oblivious to the gnawing anxiety of wondering where his next meal would come from. A security guard's gaze swept across the room, and Grace instinctively ducked behind a champagne display, her heart hammering against her ribs as polished shoes passed within inches of her hiding place. When the perceived danger had passed, she emerged, finding herself directly behind Khalid's chair, close enough to detect the subtle, expensive scent of his cologne and to discern the precise positioning of every piece on the chessboard. That's when she saw it. The move that would unravel everything. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, clear and resonant, as if he were standing right beside her. Chess isn't just about the pieces you see, Gracie. It's about the spaces between them, about finding the moves that nobody expects. The solution was elegant, devastatingly effective, and utterly invisible to everyone else in the room. All it would take was one small pawn, moved to one specific square, and the entire position would crumble like a house of cards caught in a hurricane. Khalid drummed his manicured fingers impatiently on the table, his boredom becoming increasingly evident. Perhaps we should make this more interesting, he mused aloud, his voice carrying across the hushed room. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the impending spectacle, as Khalid's audacious declaration hung in the air. Grace remained frozen behind his chair, her small hands gripping the straps of her tattered backpack. She could feel the weight of hungry eyes from across the room. Not the physical hunger she knew so intimately, but the voracious hunger of spectators craving entertainment, craving drama. More interesting how? Asked Victor Petro, his Russian accent thick with caution. The Grandmaster had been playing chess professionally for 2 decades, and he recognized the dangerous glint that appeared in wealthy men's eyes when they grew bored with the mere act of winning. Khalid's smile was predatory. A side bet, perhaps? Something to make the evening memorable for our distinguished guests. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was precisely the kind of high-stakes drama they'd come to witness, the collision of ego and money that made for tomorrow's sensational headlines. Phone cameras materialized like hungry vultures, poised to capture whatever spectacle was about to unfold. Grace shifted slightly, trying to maintain her invisibility while remaining close enough to continue studying the board. The position was fascinating, a complex middle game where both sides possessed viable chances, but only if they could perceive beyond the obvious, the conventional moves. She watched Petro's fingers hover over his pieces, calculating complex variations that ultimately led nowhere. The Russian Grandmaster was thinking like a Grandmaster, defensively, cautiously, attempting to protect his slight material advantage. But chess wasn't always about material gain. Sometimes it was about sacrifice, about willingly relinquishing something precious in order to gain something infinitely more valuable. I have a better idea, Khalid announced, standing abruptly. The scraping of his chair against the polished marble floor echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Let's give our esteemed audience a show they will never forget. Grace felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. Something in his tone, a subtle undercurrent of cruelty, reminded her of the leering foster fathers, who spoke sweetly before their voices turned harsh and their intentions became clear. She'd learned to recognize that particular brand of entitled cruelty, the kind that disguised itself as generosity while secretly plotting humiliation. Khalid's gaze swept the room like a spotlight, searching for potential victims, for pawns in his twisted game. Investment bankers straightened their ties nervously. Socialites adjusted their expensive jewelry. Everyone simultaneously craved and feared being chosen for whatever game the billionaire was about to propose. His eyes landed on Grace. She was pressed against the marble pillar, small and still as a hunted rabbit caught in the headlights. Her wet hair clung to her pale cheeks, and her oversized dress hung like a deflated balloon around her tiny frame. To the privileged crowd, she was an anomaly, a grimy, unwelcome presence in their pristine world, as out of place as a sparrow attempting to nest in a jewelry store. Well, Khalid drawled, his voice laced with the dangerous amusement of a cat toying with a helpless mouse. It seems we have an uninvited guest. All eyes turned to Grace. She felt the weight of their stares like physical blows, each gaze a judgment, some curious, some disgusted, all viewing her as something less than human. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, to vanish. But her legs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. 3 years of harsh conditioning had taught her that running often exacerbated the situation, attracting unwanted attention and escalating the abuse. Security. Someone called out, their voice laced with annoyance. But Khalid raised a hand, silencing them. No, let her stay. In fact, I have a proposition for a little visitor. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too predatory. Grace recognized that expression from her worst nightmares, the smile of someone who reveled in having absolute power over the powerless. The crowd leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Phone cameras shifted to video mode, eager to capture every excruciating detail of the spectacle that was about to unfold. This was the viral moment they'd eagerly share on social media, the sensational clip that would make them a part of the story, a participant in the drama. Khalid gestured grandly towards the chessboard, his movements theatrical and deliberately slow. You know what chess is, little girl? Grace nodded almost imperceptibly, her throat too tight to utter a single word. Wonderful. Khalid clapped his hands together, the sound sharp as a gunshot in a tense atmosphere. Then you'll undoubtedly appreciate this generous offer I am about to make. He turned to face his audience, ensuring that every camera captured his most flattering profile. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the most audacious bet of the entire evening. This homeless child, this complete and utter stranger, will take over Victor Petro's position in this game. Gasps and shocked murmurs echoed through the ballroom. Petro's eyebrows shot up in a mixture of confusion and insult. And, Khalid continued, his voice building to a dramatic crescendo, if she wins, I will adopt her. Give her my name, my fortune, everything. The room erupted in shocked laughter. The proposition was so preposterous, so utterly impossible, that it bordered on the absurd, on pure comedy. A 5-year-old street urchin defeating a Russian grandmaster? It was akin to betting on gravity flowing upward, on the sun rising in the west. Khalid basked in the collective reaction, his arms spread wide like a conductor leading his orchestra to a triumphant finale. This was his moment, the viral video that would solidify his legend as the most daringly generous billionaire of his generation. Win this match, and I'll adopt you, he declared, his voice booming across the polished marble floors. The laughter reached a fever pitch, an almost hysterical roar of disbelief. But Grace wasn't laughing. She was staring intently at the chessboard, seeing possibilities that existed in the spaces between the intricately carved pieces, hearing her grandfather's gentle voice whispering ancient wisdom about pawns that could transform into queens. And then, while the billionaire still reveled in his audience's amusement, Grace stepped forward, her small sneakers barely making a sound on the marble floor, and moved a piece. The laughter died as abruptly as if someone had cut the room's power supply, plunging them into darkness. Grace's small hand had moved the h7 pawn forward 2 squares. A move so seemingly simple, so innocuous, that it took several agonizing seconds for anyone to fully comprehend what had just transpired. The soft click of her pawn touching the board echoed in the sudden silence, like a gunshot in a cathedral. Petro blinked, then leaned forward, his trained eyes meticulously scanning the new position. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: initial confusion, intense concentration, then dawning horror. The color drained from his cheeks as the full implications of the move hit him like a runaway freight train. Impossible, whispered Grandmaster Elena Volov from the sidelines, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. But in the tomb-like silence, her words carried to every corner of the room, a pronouncement of the impossible made real. Grace stepped back, her small frame almost disappearing behind the throng of adults. She wasn't seeking applause or recognition. She'd learned long ago that attention from adults usually foreshadowed pain, betrayal, and disappointment. But she couldn't suppress the small surge of satisfaction that warmed her chest, a flicker of pride in her own ability. Her grandfather would have been proud. Colette's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. What exactly? She's created a 4-sequence. Petro interrupted, his Russian accent thicker than usual, his voice laced with disbelief. The pawn advance opens a diagonal for her bishop, which immediately puts significant pressure on my f7 pawn. But that isn't the truly brilliant part of the move. The Grandmaster's hands trembled slightly as he gestured towards different squares on the board. The brilliant part is that she's effectively forced my hand. I have to respond to the immediate threat, which means I am forced to move my knight. But every legal knight move leads to the same inevitable result, which is... Colette's voice had lost its theatrical boom, replaced by something much smaller and more uncertain. Checkmate in 3 moves. Petro's pronouncement fell like a heavy stone into a still pond. No matter how I respond, she's created an unstoppable sequence. The pawn move was the first domino in a chain reaction that ultimately ends with my king's death. The crowd erupted in chaos. Phones that had been diligently recording Colette's grand gesture now frantically captured something far more extraordinary, far more compelling. A homeless child dismantling a chess position that had stumped one of the world's best players. But Grace wasn't watching the excited crowd. She was remembering. Chess is the democracy of the mind, Gracie. Her grandfather had told her during their last game together 3 years ago. He'd been terribly sick then, his hands trembling as he moved the pieces. But his eyes remained as sharp and clear as winter stars. On those 64 squares, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, young or old. Only your ideas matter. Only the truth matters. The memory was bittersweet, a sharp pang of longing mixed with a surge of strength. Grandpa Joe had been the only adult who'd ever truly seen her, not as a burden or a commodity, but as a complete human being, deserving of respect and love. He died when she was 6, and with him had gone her last protector, her last advocate in a world that seemed relentlessly determined to devour vulnerable children like her. This is ridiculous, Colette sputtered, his carefully constructed composure cracking under the immense pressure. She's just a child. She probably doesn't even fully understand what she's done. But Grace did understand. She understood far more than anyone in that glittering ballroom could possibly imagine. She understood what it meant to be hungry for days on end, her stomach constantly cramping with pain. She understood the bone-chilling terror of hiding in abandoned buildings while police sirens wailed in the distance, the constant threat of discovery and further abuse. She understood the crushing weight of invisibility, of being treated like human garbage by a society that measured worth solely in terms of bank balances and social status. Most importantly, she understood that chess was one of the few things in the world that couldn't be bought, couldn't be corrupted by greed or power. It was pure, honest, and brutal in its democracy. On the chessboard, her empty stomach didn't matter. Her tattered clothes were irrelevant. Her lack of pedigree, her non-existent social standing, meant absolutely nothing. Only the truth of the position mattered. And the undeniable truth was that she'd just achieved something truly remarkable. Dr. Margaret Chen, a renowned child psychologist who had been attending the tournament as a guest of the mayor, skillfully pushed her way through the throng of spectators. Unlike the others, she wasn't solely focused on the intricate chess position. She was intently studying Grace, observing every subtle nuance of her body language, reading the unspoken story etched onto her face. The child's posture, the way she held herself, spoke volumes about trauma and survival. The constant state of alert, always ready to flee, the careful way she avoided eye contact, the defensive crouch that spoke of too many harsh words and too many raised hands. Extraordinary, Dr. Chen murmured, almost to herself. But she wasn't referring to the chess move. Meanwhile, journalists were already crafting their sensational headlines, their fingers flying across their phone screens, eager to be the first to break the story. Homeless girl humiliates billionaire. 5-year-old chess prodigy stuns elite tournament. Rags to riches. The checkmate heard round the world. But those sensational headlines, while attention-grabbing, missed the real story, the deeper, more profound truth. This wasn't solely about chess genius or fairy tale rags to riches fantasies. This was about a child who had been abandoned by every system designed to protect her, yet had somehow retained enough hope, enough trust in the basic fairness of things, to believe in the democracy of 64 squares. This was about a rare, transformative moment when pure, undeniable talent transcended every artificial barrier that society had erected between the powerful and the powerless. Petro reluctantly made his forced move, his hand heavy with defeat. Then Grace stepped forward again, her movements as precise and quiet as the gentle fall of fresh snow. The second move was just as devastatingly effective as the first, a simple bishop development that irrevocably locked the position into its inevitable conclusion. Magnificent, breathed Volov, her voice filled with awe. She's not just playing individual moves. She's playing concepts, understanding the underlying principles of chess strategy. Look how every piece harmonizes with every other piece, creating a unified, unstoppable force. This isn't beginner's luck. This is a profound understanding of the game, a level of mastery that typically takes decades to develop. Colette's face had transitioned from confident amusement to confused bewilderment to something closely resembling abject panic. The viral moment he'd so carefully orchestrated was rapidly spiraling out of his control, morphing into a humiliating public display of his own arrogance and short-sightedness. This was supposed to have been a harmless publicity stunt, a carefully calculated opportunity to demonstrate his magnanimous nature to his wealthy peers. Instead, he was helplessly watching a homeless child systematically demolish everything he thought he knew about power, privilege, and intrinsic worth. The third move came like an executioner's axe, swift, final, and undeniable. Grace pushed her queen to d8, and suddenly the board told a story that simply couldn't be argued with, couldn't be bought off with money, couldn't be explained away with convenient excuses. Checkmate. Complete and total victory by a child who possessed nothing except the tattered clothes on her back and the extraordinary knowledge contained within her young mind. In the stunned silence that followed, Grace finally looked up at Khaled, her eyes holding no triumphant gloating, no childish mockery, only a quiet, unwavering intelligence that seemed far older than her mere 5 years. She wasn't celebrating her improbable victory. She was waiting, watching intently to see if adults, the supposed pillars of society, could be trusted to honor their promises. Well, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, I won. The simple words hung in the air like a stark indictment. Khaled stared blankly at the chessboard, his mind reeling as he desperately tried to process the magnitude of what had just transpired. Around him, the cream of New York society watched with a mixture of amazement, bewilderment, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. Everyone understood the profound significance of what they'd witnessed, but no one quite knew what would happen next, how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. The adoption promise was clearly a joke. Came a voice from the crowd, a voice that cut through the tension like a shard of ice. It was Harold Peton, a ruthless hedge fund manager known for his unwavering pragmatism and his complete lack of sentimentality. No one actually expects. A promise is a promise, interrupted Dr. Chen, her voice carrying the undeniable authority of someone accustomed to advocating for the rights of children, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She'd subtly positioned herself between Grace and the surrounding crowd, acting as a silent, protective barrier, shielding the vulnerable child from further exploitation. Especially promises made to children. Khaled's expensive lawyers, who had been thoroughly enjoying the evening's entertainment, suddenly looked deeply uncomfortable. Marcus Goldstein, senior partner at the prestigious law firm of Goldstein, Weiss and Associates, whispered urgently in his client's ear, technically, with all these witnesses and the abundance of video evidence, you've made a public declaration. The legal implications could be. Are you seriously suggesting that I actually adopt some random street child? Khaled hissed back, his voice low and tight with barely suppressed fury, but not quite low enough to escape the sensitive microphones of nearby reporters. Grace heard every single word. She'd heard variations of them before, in different rooms, spoken by different adults who'd made different promises, all ultimately broken. The cold, clinical language of rejection was always the same, designed to diminish her humanity, to reduce her to nothing more than an inconvenience. But this time felt different. This time she'd won something first. This time she'd undeniably proven her worth in the only way that society seemed to understand, through demonstrable performance, through exhibiting a value that couldn't be easily dismissed or ignored. The child has clearly been coached, suggested another voice from the crowd, a sharp, dismissive tone that dripped with condescension. It belonged to Vivian Hartwell, a formidable real estate mogul known for her sharp tongue and even sharper business practices. This is obviously some sort of elaborate con, a scam designed to manipulate him. By whom, exactly? Dr. Chen's response was immediate and forceful, her voice laced with righteous indignation. Look at her. Really look at her. This child is clearly malnourished. She probably hasn't had a proper meal in days. Her clothes are soaked and torn. If this is a con, it's the most dedicated, method-acting performance I've ever witnessed. Grace felt the familiar burn of shame as attention focused once again on her tattered appearance. She was acutely aware of how she looked compared to everyone else in the opulent room, like a sparrow among peacocks, like a dandelion stubbornly growing in a meticulously manicured rose garden. The contrast was so stark, so jarring, that it felt almost intentional, as if she'd been deliberately placed there to highlight everything she wasn't, everything she lacked. But chess didn't care about appearances. Chess was brutally honest, in ways that people rarely were. The move sequence was undeniable, indisputable. The move sequence was genuine, Petro said quietly, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. The Russian grandmaster had been meticulously studying the position, running through countless variations in his head, searching desperately for some escape route that he'd somehow overlooked. There is no defense. The child saw something that all of us failed to see. His honest admission sent another wave of murmurs rippling through the already agitated crowd. Petro was ranked 7th in the world, a player who had consistently defeated world champions. If he unequivocally confirmed that the moves were brilliant, then they were, without a doubt, brilliant. Period. Khaled felt the walls closing in on him, trapping him in a situation entirely of his own making. This was supposed to have been his night, his moment to bask in the warm glow of adoration and to further demonstrate his inherent superiority. Instead, he was ensnared in a public relations nightmare, surrounded by a sea of cameras that had faithfully captured every single word of his ill-considered, public promise. Even if the moves were impressive, he said, desperately searching for any available escape route, any way to salvage his reputation. Surely no one actually expects me to. I do. The unexpected voice came from an unexpected source. Theodore Blackton, the influential owner of 3 major newspapers and a man whose opinion shaped public discourse, a man who wielded enormous power with quiet precision. I expect exactly that. Blackton stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate and absolute attention. At 72 years old, he built his sprawling media empire on the unwavering principle that powerful people should be held accountable for their words, that promises, once made, should be kept. You made a public promise, Khaled, in front of countless witnesses, cameras, and recording devices. You wagered your word against a child's skill, and you lost. Khaled sputtered, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Surely you understand that this was obviously meant as a joke. Blackton's voice, though calm, carried the weight of decades of authority and experience. You humiliated a vulnerable child for your own amusement, and when she proved herself to be far superior to your jaded expectations, you now want to dismiss it all as mere humor? What does that say about your character? The pointed question hit Khaled like a physical blow. Character was everything in his world. Business deals lived or died on reputation, on the implicit belief that a man's word meant something, that his promises were inviolable. If he was perceived as someone who made promises lightly and broke them casually, the financial implications could be devastating, potentially jeopardizing his entire empire. Grace watched the adults argue about her as if she wasn't even there, as if she were an inanimate object rather than a living, breathing human being. It was a familiar feeling, being discussed rather than included, being treated as an object rather than a person. But there was something different this time, something that gave her a fragile flicker of hope. The unwavering gaze of Dr. Chen, the unexpected support of Theodore Blackton, the tacit acknowledgement of her skill from Grandmaster Petro perhaps, just perhaps, things might be different this time. Dr. Chen knelt beside her, bringing herself down to Grace's eye level, establishing a connection based on mutual respect. What's your name, sweetheart? Grace, she whispered, the word barely audible. Grace, do you understand what's happening here? Grace nodded slowly, her eyes wide and apprehensive. He said if I won, he would adopt me. I won. The stark simplicity of her statement was devastating, a poignant reminder of the innocence of childhood juxtaposed against the complex machinations of the adult world. No convoluted legal arguments, no intricate social maneuvering, just a child stating the fundamental truth that the adults seemed determined to complicate, to obscure. And, is that what you want? Dr. Chen asked gently, her voice laced with compassion. To be adopted by him? Grace considered the question carefully, weighing her options, her hopes, and her fears. Want was a dangerous luxury, a dangerous emotion that she'd learned to suppress, to avoid. Wanting things only led to crushing disappointment and agonizing pain. But as she looked around the glittering ballroom, at the opulence and comfort and pervasive sense of security that surrounded her, she couldn't help but imagine what it might feel like to never be hungry again, to sleep in a real bed with clean sheets, to finally be, truly, safe. I want a family, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of a lifetime of longing. I want someone to want me. The simple words cut through the crowd's incessant chatter, like a blade through silk, silencing the legal arguments and the social posturing. Suddenly, the complex legal implications and the intricate social dynamics seemed petty, almost meaningless, compared to the basic human need expressed in the quavering voice of a 5-year-old child. Khalid felt something crack deep within his chest. Not his heart, exactly, because he wasn't sure if he still possessed one. But something within the thick armor of indifference he'd carefully constructed around himself began to give way. He'd grown up with every conceivable advantage handed to him on a silver platter, had never known what it meant to truly want for basic necessities, had never experienced the gnawing hunger, the bone-chilling fear, the soul-crushing loneliness that Grace had endured for most of her young life. The sudden realization that someone so small, so vulnerable, could want something so simple, a family, a sense of belonging, and be denied it by adults who possessed everything stirred long-dormant emotions he thought had been long since buried, atrophied from disuse. But emotion was a dangerous luxury he couldn't afford. Not here, not now, not with so much at stake. His reputation, his financial empire, his very identity were all on the line. Look, he said, trying desperately to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. Obviously, the child is talented. Perhaps we can arrange for proper chess instruction, enroll her in a prestigious academy, maybe even establish a scholarship in her name. That's not what you promised, Blackton interrupted, his voice unwavering. And you didn't promise chess lessons or scholarships. You promised adoption. You promised her a family. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning, resonating with the weight of unfulfilled dreams and unacknowledged responsibilities. It was a word that neither man was truly prepared to fully examine, to truly understand. The standoff stretched into an uncomfortable silence, the tension in the room so thick it could be cut with a knife. Grace stood perfectly still, her small hands clasped nervously in front of her, watching the adults decide her fate with the casual indifference of gods playing a game of dice. Dr. Chen knelt beside her again, bringing herself down to Grace's level, making direct eye contact, offering silent support. Grace could feel the warmth of her hand gently resting on her arm, a simple gesture of kindness that conveyed more than words ever could. Grace possessed the patience of someone intimately acquainted with the fact that her desires rarely held weight in such discussions. She'd been in rooms like these before, sterile courtrooms, impersonal social services offices, cold conference rooms. She'd witnessed case workers debate her future placement options, their words turning her into an inanimate object, a piece of furniture to be rearranged at their convenience. But this felt different. This time, she hadn't been summoned. She'd earned her place at the table. Dr. Chen's phone vibrated, an incoming call disrupting the tense atmosphere. She glanced at the screen, then excused herself to answer it, her voice dropping to hushed, urgent tones as she moved away. When she returned, her expression was grim, the corners of her mouth pulled down in a frown. Guy just spoke with my contact at Child Protective Services, she announced to the room, the words dropping like stones into a still pond. Grace has been missing from the system for 3 weeks. She was last placed with a family in Queens, but there's no record of how or why she left. The implication hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of unspoken accusations. Children didn't typically run away from good situations. Running was the last resort, an act of desperation. Khalid seized on this information like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. See, she's already in the system. This is clearly a matter for the proper authorities. His voice held a note of triumph, as if this revelation somehow absolved him of responsibility. Dr. Chen cut him off, her voice sharp with disapproval. Look at her, Khalid. Really look at her. She gestured towards Grace, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and outrage. This child has been surviving on her own for 3 weeks. She's malnourished, exhausted, and clearly traumatized. The proper authorities have demonstrably failed to protect her. Grace flinched at the word traumatized, as if she'd been physically struck. She hated being seen as broken, as damaged goods. Hated the way adults used clinical terms to dissect her pain, as if naming it somehow magically made it manageable. She wasn't traumatized, she insisted silently. She was surviving. There was a difference. I'm fine, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. But her protest was lost in the cacophony of the adults' debate, their voices rising and falling with the urgency of their arguments. Marcus Goldstein pulled Khalid aside, their conversation a series of urgent whispers, legal precedent, public relations nightmares, contractual obligations. It was the language of lawyers, a desperate attempt to find loopholes in what seemed like an airtight situation. Meanwhile, the journalists were having a field day. This wasn't just a feel-good human interest story anymore. This was a legal and ethical crisis playing out in real time, a morality play for the digital age. The headlines were practically writing themselves. Billionaire's adoption promise. Legal obligation or cruel joke? Child prodigy checkmates system that failed her. When public promises become legal obligations. Sarah Martinez, a reporter from the New York Times, approached Dr. Chen with practiced professionalism, her notepad poised and her gaze sharp. Dr. Chen, from a child psychology perspective, what are the implications of this situation for Grace? The implications are enormous, Dr. Chen replied, her voice resonating with professional authority. This child has demonstrated remarkable intellectual capacity under extreme stress. She survived on her own for weeks, which shows incredible resilience, but she's also been repeatedly failed by the systems designed to protect her. What happens next will either validate her worth as a human being or confirm her worst fears about adult trustworthiness. Grace listened to herself being analyzed, dissected, and categorized like a case study. It wasn't new. Social workers, psychologists, and caseworkers had been picking apart her psyche for years, searching for the root of her problems. But hearing it discussed in front of cameras and microphones made it feel more public, more permanent, as if her pain was now a matter of public record. She thought about her grandfather's stories of growing up poor during the Depression, how chess had been his escape from a world that seemed determined to crush hope. The beautiful thing about chess, Gracie, he told her, is that it's completely fair. Every player starts with the same pieces, in the same positions. What you do with them depends on your mind, not your circumstances. But life wasn't chess, she knew. In life, some people started with more pieces, better positions, stronger support systems. In life, being right wasn't always enough to win. Khaled found himself studying Grace with new attention, as if seeing her for the first time. Stripped of the theatrical context, removed from his initial assumptions, he saw something that unsettled him. This wasn't just a brilliant chess prodigy, a novelty to be paraded in front of the cameras. This was a human being who'd been systematically undervalued and underestimated by everyone who was supposed to care for her. His own childhood had been one of unlimited resources and constant validation. Private tutors, expensive schools, family connections that opened every door. He never questioned whether he deserved any of it. It had simply been his birthright. Looking at Grace, he was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. What kind of person might he have become if their circumstances had been reversed? The thought was disturbing enough that he immediately tried to dismiss it. This is getting out of hand, he announced to the room, his voice regaining its earlier authority. Clearly, this child needs professional care and proper placement. I'll make a donation to the appropriate charity, a generous donation to ensure she receives the best possible care. No. Grace's voice was small, but clear, cutting through the complicated justifications and legal maneuvers. That's not what you promised. She wasn't asking for charity or sympathy or professional intervention. She was holding an adult accountable for his word. You promised to adopt me if I won, she continued, her voice growing steadier, gaining strength with each word. I won. I proved I was good enough. I proved I had value. The last sentence broke something in the room, shattering the carefully constructed facade of indifference. Here was a 9-year-old child who'd internalized the belief that she had to prove her worth, that love and family were things to be earned rather than given freely. Theodore Blackstone stepped forward, his media empire's influence weighing behind every word. Khaled, you have a choice here. You can honor your promise and gain a daughter, or you can break your word and lose your reputation. But you can't do both. This is extortion, Khaled protested, his face flushed with anger. This is accountability, Blackstone corrected, his voice sharp with disdain, something you've apparently avoided for most of your privileged life. The crowd watched in fascination as one of the world's most powerful men found himself trapped by his own careless words, caught in a web of his own making. But Grace wasn't watching the crowd. She was watching Khaled's face, trying to read the emotions that flickered behind his eyes. Fear, anger, calculation, but also something else, something that looked almost like recognition. For just a moment, their eyes met across the chasm of wealth and circumstance that separated them. In that instant, Grace saw not a billionaire or a symbol of everything she'd been denied, but another human being wrestling with a decision that would define who he truly was. The question hanging in the air wasn't really about legal obligations or public promises. It was about what happened when unlimited privilege collided with unlimited need, when someone who'd never wanted for anything met someone who'd wanted for everything. It was about whether wealth could buy wisdom, and whether wisdom could teach wealth what it had never learned about the value of human life. The answer would reshape both of their futures in ways neither could imagine. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, a suffocating blanket of unspoken expectations. Khaled felt the weight of every camera, every expectant face, every whispered conversation that would follow him for the rest of his life. In 42 years of existence, he'd never faced a decision where all paths led to consequences he couldn't control or purchase his way out of. I need a moment, he said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier bravado, sounding suddenly small and vulnerable. To think. Take all the time you need, Blackstone replied with the patience of someone who knew the outcome was inevitable. But understand that your silence is also an answer. Grace remained motionless, her small frame a study in controlled tension. She'd learned to read adult moods the way sailors read storm clouds. Survival depended on knowing which way the wind was blowing. Right now, the wind felt dangerous and unpredictable. Dr. Chen approached her again, this time with a gentle smile that didn't quite hide her professional concern. Grace, honey, can you tell me about your family, your parents? The question landed like a physical blow, sending a shockwave through Grace's carefully constructed composure. For just a moment, her facade wavered before she rebuilt it, brick by brick, reinforcing the walls around her heart. My mom left when I was 3. I don't remember her much. My dad, he died in a car accident when I was 4. And my grandfather, Grandpa Joe, took care of me after that. He taught me chess and told me stories and made me feel. Grace searched for words that could capture what her grandfather had meant to her, like I mattered. But he got sick and died when I was 6. The simple recitation of loss was devastating in its matter-of-factness, a stark testament to the hardships she'd endured. This child had experienced more tragedy in her brief life than most adults faced in decades. Yet she spoke about it with the detached professionalism of someone reading a case file, as if narrating someone else's misfortune. What happened after your grandfather died? Dr. Chen asked gently, her voice filled with compassion. Foster care. 5 different families in 3 years. Grace's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, the words heavy with unspoken pain. Some were okay. Some weren't. The last one. I had to leave. She didn't elaborate, but the adults in the room understood. The statistics on foster care abuse were well known among those who worked with children. The fact that a 9-year-old had chosen the streets over her placement told its own story, a chilling indictment of a system that was supposed to protect the vulnerable. Khaled found himself thinking about his own childhood again, specifically the unconditional love of parents who'd celebrated every achievement and cushioned every failure. He'd been wanted, treasured, protected. The idea that a child could grow up believing she had to earn the basic right to be loved was as foreign to him as life on another planet. His phone buzzed with a barrage of messages from business associates who'd seen the live streams. The reactions ranged from amusement to concern to barely concealed schadenfreude. His publicist was having a meltdown. His board of directors was probably holding an emergency session. The carefully crafted image he'd spent decades building was cracking in real time. But for the first time in his adult life, Khaled found himself caring less about external perceptions than internal truths. Looking at Grace, really looking at her, he saw something that challenged every assumption he'd made about worth and value, and what it meant to be human. You said you've been surviving on your own for 3 weeks, he said suddenly, addressing Grace directly for the first time since his theatrical promise. How? Grace looked up at him with surprise, her eyes widening slightly. Adults rarely asked her about her survival strategies. They were usually more interested in lecturing her about the dangers of life on the streets, scolding her for her choices. I'm good at finding places to hide, she said simply, her voice devoid of self-pity. Subway tunnels are warm. Library bathrooms are safe during the day. People throw away a lot of food that's still good. Each word was a small indictment of a society that allowed children to fall through cracks wide enough to swallow their futures, a condemnation of the indifference that allowed such suffering to persist. Khaled had eaten more expensive meals that week than Grace had eaten meals for the entire period. And you've been alone this entire time? Grace nodded, her gaze unwavering. It's safer alone. Other kids, some of them, are mean and adults. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. The crowd was getting restless. What had started as entertainment was becoming uncomfortably real, forcing them to confront realities they preferred to ignore. These were people who donated to children's charities for tax write-offs and social status, who felt virtuous about their philanthropy while maintaining a careful distance from actual human suffering. Perhaps we should involve Child Protective Services, suggested one of the guests, a woman whose own children had never known a day of want or worry, her face etched with concern. CPS already failed her, Dr. Chin responded sharply, her voice laced with frustration. They placed her with a family that was supposed to protect her, and instead, she ended up fleeing for her safety. The system isn't working for children like Grace. Children like Grace. The phrase echoed in Khaled's mind, resonating with a new and unsettling understanding. What did that mean exactly? Children who were too smart for their own good? Children who'd been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love them? Children who'd learned to survive in a world designed to destroy them? He thought about his own children, the ones he'd never had because he'd been too busy building his empire to build a family. He told himself there would be time later, that success had to come first. Now, approaching middle age, he was surrounded by wealth and achievements, but had never experienced the simple joy of reading bedtime stories or teaching someone to ride a bicycle. The irony wasn't lost on him that a homeless child had just demonstrated skills that had taken him years to acquire. Yet she had no one to celebrate her achievement with. The legal ramifications of adoption are complex, Marcus Goldstein interjected, clearly trying to give his client an escape route. There are background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations, all of which can be expedited with sufficient resources, Blackstone countered, his eyes glinting with amusement. Let's not pretend bureaucracy is insurmountable when we both know money talks. Grace listened to the adults debate her future as if she were a business transaction to be negotiated, a commodity to be bought and sold. It was familiar territory. She'd been the subject of similar discussions in courtrooms and conference rooms where caseworkers and lawyers argued about what was in her best interest without ever asking her what she wanted. But this time felt different. This time, she'd earned her seat at the table. What happens if he says no? She asked Dr. Chin quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Then we find other options, Dr. Chin replied carefully, choosing her words with precision. There are good families looking to adopt. People who want normal kids, Grace interrupted, her voice flat and emotionless. Not kids with problems, not kids who've been in the system. The adult in Dr. Chin wanted to offer reassurance, to promise that everything would work out. But the professional in her knew better. Grace was right. The older children got, the harder placement became. Add trauma history and survival behaviors to the mix, and the prospects became even bleaker. You're not a problem to be solved, Dr. Chin said instead, her voice filled with genuine empathy. You're a person who deserves love and stability. Grace wanted to believe her. She desperately wanted to believe her. But belief was another luxury she'd learned to do without, a fragile hope that had been shattered too many times. Khaled overheard the conversation, and something inside him shifted, a tectonic shift in his understanding of the situation. This wasn't about charity or public relations or legal obligations anymore. This was about a fundamental question that went to the core of who he was as a human being. When confronted with genuine need, genuine brilliance, genuine humanity, would he step up or step away? The answer would define him more clearly than any business deal or charitable donation ever could, revealing the true character beneath the carefully constructed facade of wealth and success. He looked at Grace again, seeing not a public relations nightmare or a legal obligation but a child whose intelligence and resilience had been forged in the crucible of abandonment and loss. A child who just demonstrated that brilliance couldn't be bought, that wisdom could emerge from the most unlikely places, that worth had nothing to do with bank balances or social status. For the first time in his adult life, Khaled Al-Mansour faced a decision that money couldn't influence and power couldn't control, a decision that would reveal who he truly was beneath the carefully constructed facade of wealth and success. The room held its breath, waiting for his answer, suspended in a moment of profound anticipation. Khaled walked to the window overlooking Central Park, his reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. Beyond the hotel's warmth, the city sprawled in all directions, a vast tapestry woven with millions of lives unfolding in apartments and shelters, and yes, in subway tunnels where children learned to survive on scraps and ingenuity. He built his fortune on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, on ruthlessly exploiting every advantage. But this wasn't a business transaction. This was a human being whose entire future hung on his next words, whose destiny rested in his hands. Tell me about the chess, he said suddenly, turning back to Grace, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. Who taught you to see that combination? Grace's eyes flickered with something that might have been relief, a spark of hope igniting within the darkness. Finally, an adult was asking about her abilities rather than her problems, acknowledging her skill rather than focusing on her suffering. My grandfather, she said, her voice gaining a newfound warmth. He said that in chess, everyone starts equal. And what did he mean by that? Khaled prompted, encouraging her to elaborate. For the first time that evening, Grace's voice carried a genuine warmth, a hint of the joy that had been missing from her expression. He said, in the real world, some people get more pieces to start with, but in chess, everyone gets the same army. What you do with it depends on how well you think, not how much money you have. The philosophy struck Khaled like a revelation, a profound truth that resonated deep within his soul. Here was wisdom from a man who'd probably died owning nothing, passed down to a granddaughter who'd inherited even less. Yet it contained truths that Khaled's Ivy League education had never taught him, insights that his wealth and privilege had obscured. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. He was the best person I ever knew, Grace said simply, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He never lied to me, or made promises he couldn't keep. The implicit challenge in her words was clear, a subtle accusation that cut through Khaled's carefully constructed defenses. He had made a promise in front of cameras and witnesses, then immediately tried to wriggle out of it when the reality proved inconvenient. What did that say about his character compared to a man who'd owned nothing but had given a child the gift of unwavering honesty? Dr. Chen was speaking quietly with several other guests, explaining trauma responses and attachment disorders and the complexities of caring for children who'd been repeatedly abandoned. Khaled caught fragments of the conversation. Trust issues, behavioral challenges, the long process of healing psychological wounds. It's not like taking in a pet, he heard her say, her voice filled with concern. Children who've experienced trauma don't just need food and shelter. They need patience, consistency, and unconditional love. They need parents who understand that healing takes time. Parents. The word sent an unexpected jolt through Khaled's chest, a sudden and unfamiliar ache. He'd never seriously considered parenthood, had always assumed there would be time for family after he'd conquered the business world. But now, faced with the possibility of instant fatherhood, he found himself wondering what kind of father he would be. His own father had been loving but distant, more comfortable showing affection through expensive gifts than emotional availability. Khaled had inherited the empire, but also the emotional patterns, the tendency to prioritize achievement over connection. He knew how to provide materially, but had never learned the more subtle arts of nurturing and guidance. Could he learn? More importantly, did Grace deserve to become his experiment in personal growth, a pawn in his own journey towards self-improvement? The media attention will be intense, Marcus whispered in his ear, his voice tight with concern. Every aspect of your life will be scrutinized. Every parenting decision will be public. Are you prepared for that level of invasion? Khaled hadn't considered the full implications, the extent to which his life would be irrevocably changed. Adopting Grace wouldn't just alter his personal life, it would fundamentally transform his public persona. He would no longer be the carefree billionaire bachelor, the playboy who jetted around the world on a whim. He would be responsible for protecting and nurturing a child who'd already suffered more than anyone should, for providing her with the stability and security she desperately needed. But as he looked at Grace, standing small and alone while adults debated her future, he realized that his discomfort with media attention paled in comparison to her need for security and love. His own concerns seemed trivial in the face of her vulnerability, his fears insignificant compared to the challenges she had already overcome. Grace, he said, approaching her with newfound intentionality, his voice sincere and unwavering. Can I ask you something? She nodded wearily, her shoulders slumping slightly, as if carrying the weight of the world. If I adopted you, if you became my daughter, what would you want that to mean? The question caught her off guard, taking her by surprise. No adult had ever asked her to define what family meant to her, to articulate her own needs and expectations. They'd always imposed their own definitions, their own expectations, their own limitations. They'd always assumed they knew what was best for her without bothering to ask. I want someone who won't leave, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to voice the deepest yearning of her heart. Someone who won't send me away when I'm not perfect. Someone who... She struggled for words to express a need so fundamental she'd almost stopped believing it could be fulfilled. Someone who's glad I exist. The simplicity of her request was devastating, a stark indictment of the neglect and indifference she'd endured. She wasn't asking for wealth or luxury, or even comfort. She was asking for the basic human need to be wanted, to belong somewhere, to matter to someone. Khaled felt something crack open inside his chest, not his heart breaking, but his heart opening for the first time in decades, allowing a flood of empathy and compassion to flow through him. He'd spent so much energy building walls to protect his wealth and status that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely moved by another person's need, to be truly touched by their vulnerability. What if I disappoint you? He asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. What if I don't know how to be a good father? Grace considered his question with the seriousness it deserved, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't expecting perfection. She knew that was an unrealistic expectation. What she needed was someone who was willing to try, someone who was willing to learn, someone who was willing to put her needs first. How do you want to learn? She asked, her voice soft but firm, her eyes locking with his. The question hung between them, heavy with possibility, a challenge, and an invitation all in one. Want. Such a simple word, but it contained everything. The deepest desires, the most profound longings, the most fundamental human needs. Did he want to learn how to love unconditionally, to give without expecting anything in return? Did he want to prioritize someone else's needs above his own comfort, to sacrifice his own desires for the well-being of another? Did he want to become the kind of person who could provide not just material security but emotional safety, creating a haven where she could finally heal and thrive? Looking at Grace, seeing the intelligence and resilience that had emerged from such difficult circumstances, Khaled realized that she had already learned lessons about courage and survival that he never needed to master, that she possessed a wisdom that far exceeded his own. Perhaps the question wasn't whether he could teach her, but whether he could learn from her, whether he could allow her to guide him towards a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human. "I've never wanted anything more," he said, and realized as he spoke the words that they were completely true, that this wasn't just a fleeting impulse or a public relations stunt, but a genuine desire that resonated deep within his soul. The room erupted in astonished murmurs, a wave of surprise and disbelief washing over the crowd. Theodore Blackstone smiled with satisfaction, knowing that he had played a part in this transformation. Dr. Chin looked cautiously optimistic, hopeful that this unconventional arrangement could actually work. The journalists frantically updated their stories with this unexpected development, eager to break the news of this improbable pairing to the world. But Grace just stood there, studying Khaled's face for signs of the insincerity she'd learned to expect from adult promises, searching for the telltale flicker of deception in his eyes. What she saw instead was something she'd almost stopped believing existed: genuine commitment, a sincere and unwavering resolve. "You mean it," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation, as if afraid to trust what her eyes were telling her. "I mean it," Khaled said, kneeling down to her eye level, his gaze locking with hers. "If you'll have me as your father, I would be honored to have you as my daughter." For the first time in 3 years, Grace allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she belonged, a family where she could finally be safe and loved. The walls around her heart began to crumble, brick by brick, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of trust. 3 months later, the transformation was visible in more than just living arrangements, a testament to the power of love and commitment to heal even the deepest wounds. Grace sat in the study of Khaled's Central Park penthouse, a room filled with priceless artifacts and exquisite works of art. Her chess set was arranged on a mahogany table that cost more than most people earned in a year, a symbol of the vast difference in their circumstances. But the expensive surroundings hadn't changed the essential nature of their relationship, the bond that had formed in the crucible of adversity. It was still built on the democracy of 64 squares, where worth was measured by the quality of ideas rather than the price of possessions, where intelligence and creativity were valued above all else. "Your knight fork is getting stronger," Khaled observed, studying the position where Grace had just won as queen, his voice filled with admiration. "But you're telegraphing the setup. See how you moved your knight 2 turns ago? That gave away your intention." Grace nodded, absorbing the feedback with the focused attention she brought to everything that mattered to her. Learning had become safe again, a source of joy rather than a source of anxiety. Failure had become educational rather than catastrophic, an opportunity to grow and improve. And growth had become possible when it wasn't shadowed by the constant fear of abandonment, when she knew that she was loved and valued regardless of her performance. The adoption process had been complex but swift, expedited by Khaled's resources and the unique circumstances that had made their story international news. Legal challenges from groups questioning the legitimacy of a spur-of-the-moment promise had been overcome by testimony from witnesses and the clear evidence of Grace's welfare in her new environment, the visible transformation in her well-being. More importantly, the emotional adoption had been taking place gradually, built on small moments of trust and understanding, on shared laughter and quiet conversations, on a growing sense of belonging and connection. The first night, Grace had slept through without nightmares, her body finally able to relax and release the accumulated tension of years of trauma. The first time she'd asked for help with homework without fear of being seen as a burden, her voice tentative but hopeful. The first time she'd called him Dad, instead of Mr. Al-Mansour, tentatively, ready to retreat if the word wasn't welcome, her heart pounding with anticipation. It had been welcome, embraced with a warmth that melted away years of loneliness and fear. Dr. Chin visited weekly, not as an investigator or a therapist, but as a support system, a trusted friend who provided guidance and encouragement. The trauma didn't disappear overnight, of course. There were still moments when Grace flinched at sudden movements, still nights when fear overwhelmed her in the darkness between sleeping and waking. But healing was happening, slowly but surely, built on the foundation of consistent safety and unwavering acceptance, on the knowledge that she was finally home. "Tell me about school," Khaled said, moving his king to safety while they talked, his voice filled with genuine interest. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I'm reading at a high school level," Grace reported matter-of-factly, her eyes sparkling with pride. "And Mr. Chin, he's different from Dr. Chin, he's the math teacher, says I understand math concepts that most kids don't learn until middle school." The academic acceleration had been one of their first decisions together, a recognition that Grace's exceptional intelligence needed appropriate challenges, that she couldn't be held back by the limitations of the traditional curriculum. But they'd also been careful not to isolate her further from children her own age, to ensure that she had the opportunity to develop social skills and form meaningful connections with her peers. She attended a progressive private school where individual learning plans were the norm rather than the exception, where her unique abilities were celebrated rather than suppressed. "Any problems with the other kids?" Grace hesitated, the question laced with unspoken complexities. Social integration remained an uphill battle, not because the other children were intentionally cruel, but because the chasm between their lived realities was vast and unbridgeable. How could you possibly articulate, to classmates lamenting the mere 2 vacation homes at their disposal, the bone-deep gratitude of finding a warm subway grate on a freezing night? "Great," she muttered under her breath, a sarcastic edge to her voice. "Sometimes," she continued cautiously, choosing her words with meticulous care, "they ask about before. About being homeless." The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Asterisk, what do you even say? Khaled watched her, his heart aching with a familiar mix of admiration and protectiveness. "What do you tell them, Grace?" he prompted gently. Grace's eyes met his, reflecting a wisdom far beyond her years. "That it taught me things. That I learned to see opportunities other people miss. That being different isn't the same as being wrong." Khaled smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. Those were lessons he, a seasoned businessman, was still grappling with himself. The cutthroat world of corporate finance had always prized conformity and predictable thinking. Grace's unique perspective, forged in the crucible of survival rather than the gilded cage of privilege, had already begun to subtly reshape his own decision-making processes. Her startling insights into human nature, her uncanny ability to discern what people truly meant beneath the veneer of polite conversation, her unwavering belief in authenticity over mere appearance, had proven remarkably, even unnervingly, astute. Speaking of opportunities, he said, shifting gears and injecting a lighter note into the conversation, I had a rather fascinating conversation with the International Chess Federation today. The effect was immediate. Grace's head snapped up from the chessboard, her attention laser-focused. Chess, the intricate ballet of strategy and calculation, remained her first language, the one realm where she felt truly, unequivocally, herself. They want to invite you to a youth tournament in Paris next month, Khalid continued, carefully gauging her reaction. Players from all corners of the globe, ages 8 to 18, it's an extraordinary opportunity, Grace. But Khalid had learned to read the subtle nuances of her expressions, the flicker of apprehension that could mask excitement, the practiced stoicism that hid deep-seated vulnerability. He knew that what might seem like an obvious gift to him could feel like an unbearable pressure, an obligation born from adult expectations, to someone who had learned to be instinctively wary of ulterior motives. Grace hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. Would you want me to go? She finally asked, the question revealing the depth of the healing that still needed to take place. She still struggled to fully embrace the notion that her own desires, her own wants and preferences, might actually be the primary consideration in decisions concerning her life. Years spent adapting to the choices of others had trained her to suppress her own needs, to prioritize survival over self-expression. Khalid reached across the table and gently took her hand. I would love to go, Grace, he said, his voice firm and unwavering, but only if you want to compete. This is about you, Grace, not about me vicariously reliving my youth through your achievements. Grace considered the offer with her characteristic seriousness, her mind already racing through the potential implications. International competition meant intense pressure, sky-high expectations, and the very real possibility of public failure, a spotlight glaring on her every misstep. But it also presented the unparalleled chance to test herself against the best young minds in the world, to discover the true extent of her abilities, to push the boundaries of her potential. I want to try, she said finally, her voice surprisingly steady. Even if I lose, I want to know how good I really am. The newfound confidence in her voice was a testament to their evolving bond, a hard-won victory forged in the trenches of shared vulnerability and unconditional acceptance. It was a confidence built on the realization, slowly dawning over the past months, that failure, while painful, was not catastrophic when it occurred within the safe harbor of unconditional love. Khalid had consciously striven to detach his own ego from her performances, celebrating effort and learning rather than fixating solely on results. Their relationship was not without its challenges. Khalid's learning curve as a father was steep and arduous, complicated by decades of prioritizing work over personal connections, of building walls around his heart. Grace's trust, understandably, came in delicate layers, each revelation peeling back new depths of both strength and profound vulnerability. They were both, in essence, learning to be a family to each other, crafting something entirely new, something neither had truly experienced before. But the foundation of their relationship was undeniably solid, built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and a shared commitment to growth, rather than obligation or mere circumstance. They had unlocked dormant qualities within each other. Khalid's long-suppressed capacity for nurturing, Grace's burgeoning ability to trust, to believe in the inherent goodness of others. Their disparate backgrounds and vastly different life experiences had become sources of strength and understanding, rather than insurmountable obstacles. Check, Grace said, her voice soft but firm, as she slid her bishop across the chessboard with quiet satisfaction. Khalid studied the board, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He realized, with a sheepish grin, that he had been so engrossed in their conversation, so focused on navigating the complex emotional landscape of their relationship, that he had completely missed the tactical sequence unfolding before him. Grace had learned to anticipate several moves ahead, not just in the game of chess, but in the larger game of life, planning strategically for future possibilities while remaining agile enough to adapt to the inevitable shifts in circumstance. Excellent, he conceded with a wry smile, tipping over his king in a gesture of surrender. You're playing at a completely different level than you were just 3 months ago. Grace's eyes twinkled with amusement. Everything's different than it was 3 months ago, she replied, her voice filled with an understated joy. And for the first time since he had come to know her, her smile radiated from the depths of her soul, reaching all the way to her eyes, illuminating her entire face with a radiant happiness. Through the panoramic windows of the penthouse, Central Park stretched out before them. A verdant oasis of green and peaceful serenity bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sunlight. The same park where Grace had once sought refuge from the unforgiving elements now served as the expansive backyard of her new life, visible from the window of the bedroom where she slept soundly and securely every night. The external transformation was undeniably complete, but the internal growth, the blossoming of her spirit, was only just beginning. 6 months after the formal adoption, Grace Al-Mansour found herself standing before the most intimidating chessboard of her young life. The World Youth Chess Championship in Dubai had drawn together the planet's most promising young players, a dazzling array of talent and ambition. But even amongst this extraordinary gathering, none carried a story quite as remarkable, as poignant as hers. The cavernous tournament hall buzzed with a cacophony of 15 different languages, the hushed whispers of proud parents, and the palpable tension that always permeated the air surrounding serious competition. Her opponent across the polished chessboard was Dmitry Volov, the heir apparent to a chess dynasty. Dmitry was the grandson of Grandmaster Elena Volov, a legendary figure in the chess world, and the tournament's top seed, a position reflecting years of rigorous training and unwavering dedication. At the tender age of 12, he had been playing competitive chess since he could barely walk, meticulously coached by a team of world-renowned masters and lavishly supported by a national federation that treated chess prodigies like future Olympic athletes, grooming them for international dominance. Everything about him exuded an air of inevitability, from his ramrod straight posture to his impeccably tailored designer clothing, to the custom-made, weighted chess pieces he favored, to the deferential way other players instinctively stepped aside as he passed, acknowledging his superior status. Grace quietly adjusted her position in the oversized chair, which still seemed ridiculously large for her diminutive frame. 6 months of consistent good nutrition and a stable, secure environment had undoubtedly helped her grow physically, but she still remained noticeably smaller and more petite compared to most of her competitors. But what had grown exponentially, eclipsing even her physical growth, was her unwavering sense of self-assuredness, not an arrogant or boastful swagger, but a quiet, deeply rooted certainty that came from knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, that she belonged wherever her mind could take her, that she was capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. "This is the moment we've prepared for, Grace," Khaled whispered softly as he accompanied her to the board, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. He had learned, through trial and error, to strike the delicate balance between offering unwavering support and fostering her independence, to be present and engaged without being intrusive or overbearing. "But remember, Grace," he continued, meeting her gaze with unwavering intensity, "the result doesn't change anything." Grace smiled, a genuine expression of warmth and affection, and finished the sentence for him. "You'll be proud of me no matter what happens." It had taken months of conscious effort, countless heartfelt conversations, and unwavering demonstrations of love for her to truly believe those words, to fully internalize the radical concept that love was not conditional on performance, that her worth as a human being was not dependent on her winning or losing. But now, those words, once met with skepticism and suspicion, served as a source of profound liberation, freeing her to play without the crippling fear of failure, to take calculated risks without the weight of catastrophic consequences hanging precariously over every decision. The vast tournament hall fell silent as the round officially began. Grace had navigated 5 grueling rounds, each hard-fought victory amplifying the media attention and increasing the pressure exponentially. Journalists, captivated by her Cinderella story, dubbed her the miracle girl and the chess prodigy from the streets. But Grace had learned to effectively filter out the external noise, to tune out the distractions and the pressures, and to focus all her attention on the only thing that truly mattered, the intricate position laid out before her on the chessboard. Dimitri, in contrast to Grace's intuitive and often unorthodox style, played with textbook precision, constructing his position methodically and deliberately, while studiously avoiding tactical complications. He had clearly dedicated countless hours to studying her previous games, meticulously preparing a specific strategy to counter her aggressive and creative approach. His plan was deceptively simple, yet undeniably sound. Limit her opportunities for creative improvisation, force the game into well-trodden technical channels where his superior training and vast theoretical knowledge would give him an undeniable advantage. For the first 30 moves, Dimitri's carefully crafted plan unfolded with near-perfect execution. Grace found herself in a complex endgame position where Dimitri held every conceivable theoretical advantage, superior piece coordination, a more favorable pawn structure, and a demonstrably deeper understanding of technical chess principles. The position, from a purely objective standpoint, was the chess equivalent of David facing Goliath, if Goliath also happened to be a tactical genius with years of professional training under his belt. The members of the press section leaned forward in anticipation, their collective breath held, as Grace seemingly slipped deeper and deeper into an inescapable predicament. This was the moment that many had secretly predicted, the inevitable point where the talented amateur, fueled by raw talent and a compelling backstory, would finally hit the brick wall of serious, world-class competition, the fairy tale narrative ending in predictable disappointment. But Grace had learned something during her months with Khaled, a valuable lesson that no chess book could ever teach, a lesson that transcended the intricacies of pawn structures and piece sacrifices, how to find a glimmer of hope even in the most seemingly hopeless of situations. She had, after all, survived homelessness, weathered abuse, and overcome abandonment. A difficult chess position, by comparison, was merely another intricate puzzle waiting to be solved, another obstacle to be overcome with ingenuity and unwavering determination. She studied the board with the patient focus that her grandfather had instilled in her during their countless hours playing in the park, and the tenacious persistence that life on the unforgiving streets had demanded. Dimitri's position appeared impregnable, his defenses impenetrable. But Grace had learned to look beyond the obvious, to see the hidden possibilities that existed in the spaces between conventional moves, to identify the subtle nuances that often went unnoticed by even the most seasoned players. And then, in a flash of insight, she saw it. The complex combination required sacrificing her queen, the most powerful and versatile piece on the board, for what initially appeared to be woefully inadequate compensation. Every logical calculation screamed that the trade was disastrous, a reckless blunder that would immediately hand the victory to her opponent. Every chess computer analysis would undoubtedly condemn it as a catastrophic error in judgment. But Grace saw something deeper, something that pure logic and cold calculation simply couldn't capture. Sometimes, she realized, the most powerful move was the one that looked like an act of surrender, the one that defied conventional wisdom and turned the expectations of your opponent completely on their head. With a steady hand, she lifted her queen, the weight of the decision palpable in the sudden silence of the hall. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, allowing a sliver of doubt to creep into her mind, questioning the sanity of her plan. But then, stealing her resolve, she placed it deliberately on the designated square, offering it as a sacrifice to Dimitri's waiting knight. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the hall. Spectators, unable to comprehend her line of reasoning, assumed that she had made a tragic blunder under the immense pressure of the moment, succumbing to the psychological warfare of the competition. Even Khaled, watching anxiously from a seat in the audience, felt his stomach plummet as he witnessed his daughter seemingly throwing away her chances with one seemingly catastrophic move. But Dimitri, the chess prodigy trained from birth to recognize the subtle nuances of the game, knew better. The 12-year-old stared intently at the board, his face slowly paling as the full implications of Grace's audacious sacrifice began to dawn on him. The queen trade, seemingly advantageous to him, forced a complex sequence of moves that initially looked favorable to his position, but contained a hidden and deadly poison. Grace had cleverly given up material in order to gain tempo, sacrificing immediate advantage for long-term positional dominance. By the time Dimitri fully grasped the intricate trap that Grace had so skillfully laid, it was already too late to escape its clutches. Grace's remaining pieces, which had appeared weak and disorganized just moments before, suddenly coordinated into an unstoppable attacking force. Her pawns advanced with relentless, mechanical precision, inexorably pushing forward. Her bishop and knight worked in perfect harmony, supporting each other and controlling key squares on the board. And even her king, usually relegated to a defensive role in the endgame, became an active participant in the assault, joining the attack with surprising effectiveness. Magnificent, breathed Grandmaster Elena Volkov, a renowned commentator, from her perch in the commentary booth, her voice filled with awe and admiration. She's playing pure chess poetry. This isn't just calculation. This is intuition at its highest level. A masterpiece of strategic vision. The final position was a true work of art, a testament to Grace's creativity and her deep understanding of the game. Dimitri's extra queen, the most powerful piece on the board, was rendered utterly powerless to prevent the inevitable checkmate, trapped on the wrong side of the board, unable to influence the decisive action. Meanwhile, Grace's humble pawns, those often overlooked foot soldiers of the chessboard, delivered the killing blow, forcing Dimitri's king into an inescapable corner. The tournament's top seed, the boy who had been groomed from birth to be a chess champion, had been decisively defeated by a girl who had learned the game on her grandfather's knee and perfected it in the tunnels and hidden corners of the New York City subway system. Grace slowly stood up from the board, her legs trembling slightly with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. She had done far more than simply win a chess game. She had proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that brilliance could emerge from anywhere, that potential existed in the most unexpected places, and that true worth couldn't be measured in privilege or pedigree. As the hall erupted in thunderous applause, Grace instinctively looked toward the audience, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto Khaled's familiar face. He was crying openly, tears streaming down his cheeks, not from disappointment or relief, but from pure, unadulterated pride in what she had accomplished. Not just the victory itself, but the grace, the courage, and the unwavering determination she had displayed in achieving it. For perhaps the first time in her young life, Grace had someone in the audience who was unconditionally proud of her, someone whose love didn't depend on her winning or losing, but simply on who she was, on the unique and extraordinary individual she had become. The realization hit her like a wave of warmth, washing away the years of self-doubt and replacing them with a profound sense of belonging. Tears welled up in her own eyes, mirroring Khaled's emotion, and she felt the corners of her mouth lift in a genuine, heartfelt smile. She had truly come home. 2 years later, Grace Almansour stood on the grand stage of the United Nations General Assembly, addressing an audience of world leaders, dignitaries, and policymakers about the critical importance of child welfare and equal educational opportunity. At the remarkably young age of 11, she had not only become a world-renowned chess champion, but also a powerful and influential voice for children who had been forgotten by the very systems designed to protect them. Every child deserves the chance to discover their potential, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying effortlessly through the vast hall. Not because of their circumstances, but despite them. Not because they've proven their worth, but because worth is inherent in being human, an unalienable right granted at birth. In the audience, Khaled watched his daughter with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose life had been irrevocably transformed by an unexpected gift. The adoption had changed him as profoundly as it had changed Grace, teaching him invaluable lessons about unconditional love, about the virtues of patience, and about the crucial difference between simply providing for someone's material needs and providing genuine meaning and purpose for their life. Their relationship had not been without its challenges. Learning to trust, to truly open her heart, had taken Grace time, and learning to effectively parent a child with a history of trauma had taken Khaled even longer. There had been difficult and emotionally draining conversations about her past, painful setbacks when old traumas resurfaced, and moments when both had questioned whether they were truly equipped for this complex and demanding journey. But through it all, they had persevered, growing into a family gradually, one shared experience at a time, built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and a deep and abiding love. Chess remained their common language, a bond that transcended words, but their relationship had expanded far beyond the confines of the 64 squares where it had all begun. They had learned to laugh together, to argue constructively, to dream audaciously, to navigate all the messy, beautiful, and sometimes chaotic work of becoming a family to each other. Grace's chess career had continued to flourish under Khaled's unwavering support and encouragement, but even more importantly, her sense of self had healed and strengthened, blossoming into a confident and resilient young woman. She had won 3 international youth championships, solidifying her position as one of the most promising players of her generation, and was being compared to the greatest players in chess history. Yet she wore her achievements lightly, understanding that her value as a person was not inextricably tied to her performance on the chessboard. Together, Grace and Khaled had established a foundation focused on providing educational opportunities and essential resources for foster children and homeless youth, giving back to the community that had once sustained Grace. Grace insisted on being actively involved in every aspect of the foundation's work, not just as a figurehead or a symbol, but as someone who truly understood the unique challenges these children faced, having lived through them herself. She spoke at conferences, mentored younger children in foster care, and worked tirelessly to ensure that others didn't fall through the cracks of the system, as she had nearly done. The most important game I ever won wasn't at a chess tournament, Grace concluded her impassioned speech to the United Nations. It was the game that taught me I was worth loving, that I was deserving of care and compassion. That game changed 2 lives, mine and my father's, and showed us both that family isn't about blood or circumstance. It's about choice. It's about choosing to love someone, not because you have to, but because you want to. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that reverberated through the hall. But amidst the deafening roar, Grace's eyes searched for and found only one face in the crowd. Khaled was crying again, as he often did when he reflected on the improbable chain of events that had brought them together, the serendipitous twists of fate that had woven their lives together in such a profound and meaningful way. A careless promise, initially made in a moment of arrogance and self-interest, had become the unlikely foundation for the most meaningful and transformative relationship of his life. After the speech, as the sun began to set over the city, they walked together through Central Park, the same park where Grace had once sought shelter from the harsh realities of the streets. Now, it was simply their neighborhood, a familiar and comforting landscape, a place for leisurely afternoon walks, impromptu weekend picnics, and all the ordinary, everyday moments that made up their extraordinary life together. Proud of you, kiddo, Khaled said, his voice thick with emotion, using the affectionate nickname that had evolved naturally between them, a term of endearment that encapsulated their unique bond. Are you proud of us? Grace gently corrected, reaching out to take his hand with the easy and unself-conscious affection that had long since replaced her initial weariness and guardedness. They had both learned that true transformation was possible, that a homeless child could become a world champion, that a selfish billionaire could become a loving and devoted father, that two broken people could create something whole and beautiful together. Their story had begun with a chance encounter and a game of chess, but it had blossomed into something much larger, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, proof that love could bridge any gap, that family could be chosen rather than inherited, and that the most important victories happen not on tournament boards, but in the quiet, unassuming moments when someone decides to open their heart to another person's need. Grace squeezed Khaled's hand and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to twinkle above the shimmering lights of the city. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the world, other children were yearning to be seen, learning that they mattered, that their potential was real, that their circumstances did not have to define their futures. The game of transformation never truly ended. It simply found new players, new possibilities, new chances for love to triumph over indifference, for compassion to conquer adversity. And Grace and Khaled would be there together, side by side, helping others to discover that the most powerful move was always the decision to care. Grace's remarkable story serves as a powerful reminder that extraordinary potential exists in the most unexpected places, often hidden beneath layers of hardship and adversity, waiting for someone to recognize its inherent value and to provide the opportunity for it to flourish. Every day, countless brilliant and gifted children fall through the cracks of systems designed to protect them, their talents unseen, their voices unheard, and their worth tragically unrecognized. But transformation, no matter how improbable it may seem, is always within reach. One caring adult, one act of genuine commitment, one conscious decision to see potential rather than problems can change the trajectory of a life forever, unlocking hidden talents and unleashing untapped potential. Grace found her champion in Khaled, the unlikely benefactor who saw beyond her circumstances and recognized her inherent brilliance. But thousands upon thousands of other children are still waiting, longing for their own champion to step forward and offer them a chance to shine. You can be that champion. Whether through fostering, adoption, mentoring, or supporting organizations that serve vulnerable children, you have the power to transform lives, to rewrite narratives, and to create a brighter future for those who need it most. The child welfare system desperately needs advocates who understand that every child deserves not just safety and shelter, but also the opportunity to discover and develop their unique gifts, to pursue their passions, and to realize their full potential. Consider how you might open your heart and your home to a child who needs what you have to offer, whether it's a safe place to sleep, a listening ear, a helping hand, or simply a belief in their ability to succeed. Research local foster care agencies, volunteer with youth programs in your community, or support organizations working to improve outcomes for children in care. Your act of courage, your willingness to step outside your comfort zone, could be the pivotal moment in someone else's transformation story, the catalyst that sets them on a path toward a brighter future. The next move is yours. What will you choose? Will you allow this inspiring story to merely entertain you, or will you let it ignite a fire within you, compelling you to take action and make a tangible difference in the life of a child in need? Somewhere tonight, as you read these words, a child with unlimited potential is wondering if anyone will ever truly see their worth, if anyone will ever give them a chance to prove what they are capable of becoming. That child, somewhere out there, could be waiting for you to make a difference. Make your move, change a life, transform the future. Chess taught me that every ending is also a beginning, that even in the face of defeat, there is always hope for a new strategy, a new opportunity, a new path forward. Your story with a child who needs you could start with a single, selfless decision to care. Grace Al Mansour's story is not just a feel-good narrative, it's a call to action. Take action today. A child's tomorrow depends on it.